Panasonic, the heart of your system.
Hello, Bryony here from KitGuru, and I'm here at ASUS HQ taking a sneak peek at the new ASUS Republic of Gamers Zephyrus S laptop. Sasha, when is it going to be available in the UK market?
So it's going to come out in Q4. We don't have an exact date yet. We're going to announce that later. So you'll probably have it in the description of this video as well. I can tell you the main differences compared to the previous generation of the Zephyrus. So the original Zephyrus, the GX501, was and until today still is the slimmest gaming laptop in the world with a GTX 1080. We're quite proud of that. And after that we released the Zephyrus M, the GM501, which is aimed a little bit more at mainstream. It's at a lower price point and it's thicker, has the keyboard in the middle in the traditional position, and it has a hard drive. So that's the main difference. It's a little more mainstream. And compared to other competitors, we went for the full performance 1070 for the GM501, the Zephyrus M, while everybody else is going for the 1070 Max Q.
What improvements have you made to this new model of the Zephyrus over the previous versions?
So this is pretty much the slimmest gaming laptop again. It's even slimmer than the GX501. It's 2 millimeters slimmer at only 15 millimeters. At the slimmest point, it's actually only 14.95 millimeters, so it's super slim. Besides that, we have several improvements in cooling. It now exhausts to both sides and 2 vents at the back as well. We moved an HDMI port to the rear. We improved the panel. As you can obviously see, very slim bezel and super slim bezel, 144 Hz panel, 3 milliseconds with overdrive. And because we have such a slim bezel, the form factor is now pretty much like a 13.3-inch laptop, but you're getting a 15.6-inch panel. So it's a lot more compact. You still got the same panel size, and the weight went down from 2.25 to only 2 kilos. And the whole thing is now made out of premium materials. So the lid is made out of aluminum, CNC'd. The rest of the laptop is made out of magnesium aluminum alloy, and the hinge is made out of a special zinc alloy, which has extra tensile strength.
So you've made a lot of improvements in regard to making it feel higher quality and to improve like the build quality over the previous versions. What sort of technical changes did you have to do to make sure that it stays super slim, but you could also fit all that sort of like power into it?
Right, so we had to improve the cooling system even further, and just like the previous ones, you can see it opens up. It has the AAS, how we call it. I don't know if you can see it well from this angle. It looks very cool how it lifts up like this.
Oh yeah, so you get a vent underneath.
Yeah, so there's essentially this flap that opens up and lets the laptop pull in really cold air, and most of the air actually gets pulled in from the top right here, and then gets pushed out on the sides here and to the rear. So that's how we get the really, really slim chassis and how we get still really high performance. And we improved the thermal system as well, the thermal module. And I brought one over.
Oh yeah, let's take a look at this. So what's different about this one compared to the previous module we'd find in the older version of the Zephyr?
It's a bit dinged up, unfortunately. You can see it's a little bent in the travels. But this is pretty much how it's inside the laptop, like this. You can see there's the vents to the sides and then to the rear. And this is going to be the GPU and the CPU. And the fan is going to be sitting here, pulling in air from the top and from the bottom, and then blowing it to the sides. And the main thing we changed about it is, on the previous one, it only exhausted on this side, but now it also exhausts on this side. So we have one extra exhaust. That's pretty much 25%, 30% more airflow, extra cooling potential. And then we also changed the heat pipes, which was a very big challenge. So for heat pipes to move heat, it's basically a sealed tube, and inside there's water that acts as a cooling liquid that condenses and evaporates. So when it gets hot, it evaporates and then moves through the heat pipe to the cold point of the heat pipe, and there it then condenses and gives away the heat. So over here, the water is going to condense and evaporate and turn into steam, essentially, and then travel through the heat pipe until here where it's cool because there's fins cooling the heat pipe, and then it condenses back into liquid. The inside of this heat pipe is coated with a very fine grain copper powder that acts as a sponge. So it then pulls the liquid water back to here, and then the cycle continues. So the key thing is the thickness of the coating on the inside that acts as a sponge. You need that to make sure you can pull the liquid water back to the CPU and the GPU, and also the thickness internally in the tube, so there's still enough space for the vapor to move from the hot spot to the cold spot. And we had to keep the internal height at the same level to make sure the steam can move through, but at the same time we had to make the thickness of the heat pipe slimmer. So we achieved that by making, I got two samples here, sorry, making the wall of the heat pipe thinner. So you can see this is the old one.
The old one
and
compared
this
to the
new
new
one.
one.
So you can see
very slim.
the copper wall is much thinner, right? And you can also see the coating inside. You see that? It's much more fine-grained and thinner, but it can still move liquid water at the same speed. And obviously, as you make, you probably know from heat pipes, as soon as you bend them a little bit wrong, they lose a lot of their performance. So it's essential of bending them very carefully and exactly in the same shape without denting them in. So as soon as you make the wall of the heat pipe thinner, obviously it's much harder to bend them without reducing the performance. So it's very challenging to manufacture. And if one of the heat pipes is bent a little bit too far, the whole thermal module is essentially not working. So it's very challenging, and the yield is challenging as well, to have such a thin thermal module that can still cool high-end GPUs and CPUs in such a slim chassis.
So one of the things that people complain about with gaming laptops is sometimes the cooling system. Obviously it's going to be, the way you've designed it is to keep everything cool, but often that comes at the compromise of having a lot of noise. Is there anything you've done with this laptop to try and reduce the amount of noise that it makes?
What's unique for our laptops, for ROG, we actually developed something called silent mode, where we limit the CPU and the GPU performance a little bit further, so you give up a little bit more performance, but you get to 35 or even 33 decibels depending on the model. So it gets really, really quiet, even quieter.
Yeah, that's quieter than some desktops I've tested. So
yeah, and it's really amazing. Like when you're in an office, you don't hear the laptop at all, and you're playing games, and it's amazing that you don't hear the fans at all. And I mean, let's face it, when you just play some League of Legends or some other casual games, you don't really need the full performance, right? So you can give up a little bit of performance and have much quieter fans.
Another thing with gaming laptops as well is often battery life isn't as good, and one of the things Leo mentioned in his original review of one of the older versions of the Zephyrus is that the battery life probably wasn't as good as it could be. What changes have you made to the battery inside this model?
Right, so the previous one, the original one, had G-Sync, which meant that the GPU had to be connected directly to the panel. That also means the GPU can never go to sleep mode if you're not actually using the GPU. So for battery life, you're probably not actually playing games on the laptop, but you're using it to browse Facebook, watch videos, or do some productivity. In that scenario, you don't really need the discrete GPU, the powerful gaming GPU, but it's always running in the background, slowly draining the battery. So for this model, we use NVidia Optimus, which means that you can basically park the NVIDIA GPU if you don't use it, and you get much longer battery life.
Okay, so you talked about making the laptop a lot thinner, and you also mentioned CNC. How does that work? Okay,
so the previous one was, and still is, the slimmest 1080 laptop on the market, 17 millimeters thin. This one is 2 millimeters thinner at 15 millimeters. And one way of achieving that is we made the thermal module a little bit slimmer and some components internally. We switched to more premium materials that allow us to make the laptop even thinner and more sturdy, and also reduce the weight. So the whole chassis is aluminum or magnesium aluminum alloy, and even zinc alloy for the hinges. And a big thickness saving part was for the lid cover. The lid cover is now made by CNC, which means it's a computer controlled mill that basically drills the cover, the whole three-dimensional shape, out of a block of aluminum.
So like a block like this.
Yeah, a block just like this. And even though it is aluminum, you can...
it definitely has a lot of weight to it,
Yeah.
so you definitely wouldn't want that as a laptop lid.
And you can imagine that in
Yeah.
steel. Definitely not. So yeah, the advantage of CNCing it, this is how it then looks after the CNC process, after you cut away all the excess bits. And here you can see it takes over an hour to CNC this part. What is the benefit of it? When it's one solid piece of aluminum and you just cut away the pieces you don't need, you can make it, it's harder, it's more solid, it has a higher strength. So it allows you to make the material thinner and lighter. So that's kind of why we CNC it. But obviously, you can imagine, if you stamp it, it only takes like 1 or 2 seconds to stamp the lid cover. If you CNC it, it takes over an hour for each piece. So you can imagine it's actually quite costly and you need a lot of machines to manufacture it.
So on like the lower end models, you'll use a stamp, but because this is a more premium version and you want to make it as thin as possible but still sturdy, you use this method to
Exactly.
And then you end up with the finished product, which is
this. So this is the final display cover, and we can pull off the protection here. Satisfying sound, right?
Satisfying.
Everybody loves that sound. There's even some videos of people just pulling that off. Yeah, and you can see that's the final lid. I can show you the different parts on it. So this is the final lid. You can see right here, those are the Wi-Fi antennas. We kept them at the top to have really good Wi-Fi signal. Then we have the webcam at the top and with an array microphone. And yeah, this is basically all the inside of the lid. Here you see the ROG Eagle Eye logo as well.
It's very interesting. So that's the outside of the chassis, and we've sort of seen how that's put together. What sort of specs and things have you got going on internally with this newer version?
So it's a Core i7, 6-core, full speed, 8750H, and there's going to be a 1060 full performance one, and there's going to be a 1070 Max Q as well. And memory, 24 GB, 2666 DDR4 memory, high-speed SSD, we call it Hyperdrive, 4 PCI Express lanes, fastest SSD on the market.
Hey, KitGuru readers are seeing this early, so you've managed to get a sneak peek at this laptop. The full announcement, we're going to see it again at Gamescom, so if you're heading to Gamescom, you can actually get your hands on this one and try it out. If you like this video from KitGuru, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more from KitGuru, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and there is also a bell icon on there as well, so you can get a notification every time a new video goes live. And thank you to Sasha for showing me this new laptop today.
Thank you for coming over.